America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. Hey, happy Thanksgiving, one day away from the bird. Who's going to be cooking the bird? Are you cooking? Are you baking? Are you smoking? Deep frying? How are you preparing that turkey, that bird for tomorrow? No matter how you are, no matter what your politics are, no matter who you voted for, man, I wish everybody listening to me right now has a beautiful, peaceful, relaxing, wonderful, joyous Thanksgiving tomorrow. I wish that for all of you. Let me leave all of you before Thanksgiving. And by the way, there will be no show tomorrow, Thanksgiving. Thank God, right? No Joe Walsh, no social contract with Joe Walsh, just you, family, football, food, all of that. So no show tomorrow. We'll be back on Friday. Let me leave you all with a thought. This Wednesday, this Thanksgiving Eve. How does, let me start with the question. How does a democracy survive? Or how does a democracy work with a citizenry that's becoming increasingly uninformed and fearful? How does a democracy deal with that? How does a democracy work with that? A democracy is, by definition, right, a country of the governed. We the governed. We're the rulers. We govern each other. We represent each other. How do we do this? We are the government. How do we survive? If our population, if our people are becoming increasingly uninformed, and the data is clear across the board, left or right, every study, every data point out there right now shows that the American people are much more uninformed than they used to be. All the research out there across the political spectrum shows that misinformation and disinformation drive much of our debate. The truth isn't out there as much anymore. People are more misinformed than they've ever been in America. Voters are disinformed, misinformed, following bullshit, paying attention to lies. And this misinformation, this disinformation, all of these lies, all of this bullshit creates perceptions in people. And I'll argue the perceptions create a real fear. The question for us this Wednesday before Thanksgiving is, as a democracy, as a people who, if right, we've talked about it before, as one of our founders, Thomas Jefferson, said, if the people don't do their job, their thing, i.e. stay informed, Jefferson said, stay educated, Jefferson said, stay engaged. If the people don't stay informed, if the people are no longer driven by the facts and truth, and that creates all the shit it creates, how does a democracy survive? We saw it play out in this campaign. The misinformation, the fear. Trump won, but based on a lot of misinformation. I say often, and I believe this fervently, average Americans were lied to every single day by Donald Trump about, you name it, about migrants, about the border, about everything. And Democrats really didn't even speak to regular Americans. So you had Trump out there lying to regular Americans. You had the Democrats out there not knowing how to speak to regular Americans. America chose the liar. They went with the liar, and he won fair and square. We accept the results, but disinformation, misinformation carried the day. Haitian migrants weren't eating cats and dogs. That's a lie. That dictated a lot of the discourse. A lot of you may not know it. You may not be aware of it. Probably the one issue where Donald Trump spent more money by millions and millions running against Kamala Harris was the issue of transgender Americans. For months, Donald Trump spent billions in advertising, scaring Americans about transgenders. Kamala Harris's stance on transgender men and women. They're coming into your bathrooms. They're coming into your locker rooms. They're beating up your girls in sports and all the rest. All the rest. Day after day after day. This threat of transgender Americans. Some of the research now, or some of the reviews now, 3 weeks after the election, are showing that this issue, the misinformation about transgender Americans that Trump put out there, drove a lot of his support. We saw this play out in the campaign. I'm blown away by, and I put this in front of people when people want to understand where the country's at today. YouGov, Yahoo and YouGov did a poll 2 years ago from 2022, and they asked the American people, what percentage of Americans do you think are boom, right? So they polled Americans, and they asked a very simple question, like, what percentage of Americans are Black? What percentage of Americans are Muslim? What percentage of Americans live in New York City? What percentage of Americans are Jewish? What percentage of Americans own guns? What percentage of Americans are transgender? Fascinating poll 2 years ago by YouGov, Yahoo YouGov in 2022, asking that basic question. What percentage of Americans are lesbian and gay? And the American people responded with what they thought the percentages were. And overwhelmingly, the American people were way off. What percentage of Americans are transgender? YouGov asked us. And the number that the American people gave, how many transgenders in this country, we were way off. Wildly off. Right down the line, transgender, Muslim, Jewish, Black, live in New York City, you name it. Most Americans weren't even close. Like the results, when you ask Americans, okay, what percentage of Americans do you think are transgender? On average, the American people said 21% of our population is transgender. In reality, it's just less than 1%. But the American people think 21% of Americans are transgender. What percentage of Americans do you think are Muslim? Americans responded with 27%. Americans said 27% of our population is Muslim. The reality, 1%. Only 1% of this country is Muslim. What percentage of the country is Jewish? Americans said 30%. 30% of America is Jewish. The reality, 2%. 2% of this country is Jewish. And just think about that for a moment. If Americans think that 30% of the country is Jewish and 27% of the country is Muslims, you would think we'd see synagogues, all over this country. We'd see houses of worship, mosques, and synagogues all over this country. What percentage of the country is black? The American people were asked. The American people said 41% of the country is black. 41%. The reality, 12% of the country is black. I love this one. What percentage of the country lives in New York City? The American people said 30% of America lives in New York City. The reality, 2%. What percentage of the population is gay and lesbian? On average, the American people answered 30%. In reality, 3%. On down the line. Ask, what percentage of the American people make $1 million or more a year? Americans said 20%. 20% make $1 million or more a year. The reality, less than 1% of Americans make $1 million a year. Last one, what percentage of the American people own a gun? When asked that, Americans said 54% of Americans own guns. The reality, 32%. You notice a pattern here, right? Not even close to reality. Americans wildly overestimating. First of all, overestimating all of these minority groups, overestimating how many gays and lesbians, overestimating, I mean, off the charts, how many transgenders, how many Muslims, how many blacks, how many Jews. Americans completely overestimating how many of each of these minority populations are in this country. What's interesting too is Americans underestimated how many people in the country are just like them. So when Americans were asked what's the percentage of married people in the country, they underestimated the real number. What percentage of Americans have at least one child? Americans underestimated the real number. Same thing with what percentage of America is white? Americans wildly underestimated the percentage of our population that's white, underestimated. Same with how many own a smartphone. This was interesting because this poll was taken in 2022. The percentage of Americans who were vaccinated for COVID, against COVID, wildly underestimating how many were really vaccinated. So not even close to reality. The vast majority of Americans overestimate how many people out there are in the country who are not like them, and underestimating how many people in the country are just like them. Which makes sense. We live in bubbles. We overestimate the people outside of our bubble who we don't see. Most of us, most Americans don't know a transgender American. So we think then there must be a shitload of them out there. If they're not in my bubble, if they're not in my circle, man, the rest of the country must be inundated by transgender Americans. Same thing with blacks and Muslims. I don't really know any Muslims, most Americans say, but we know that it's a real problem because Muslims are almost a third of the country. So, oh my God, there must be a shitload of Muslims out there. This cognitive bias we have because of the bubbles we live in, because we don't know or see any, most of us, I'm generalizing, most of us aren't friends with any gay or lesbian or transgender or Muslim American or Black American. But we know because of what we watch on the news, and we know because of what we read, and we know because of people we talk to, that there are a lot of all of these populations, these peoples out there. So, man, oh my God, the rest of the country must be flooded with them. And so, what does this then create? Like a paranoia, a fear. Oh my God, there are so many transgender Americans in this country. Oh my God, they make up a huge block of this country. We've got to be afraid of that. They're everywhere out there. Again, remember, everything I'm telling you comes back to this. None of this is based on reality. The transgender population in this country is just less than 1%. Most Americans believe, when asked, it's about 21, 22%. Not even close to reality. But because then we think there are so many out there, oh my God, the country's messed up. I had no idea there were so many transgender Americans. I had no idea there were so many gay and lesbian Americans. I had no idea there were so many Muslims in this country. And we begin to get afraid. Afraid of the people we don't know, fear of the other, because we don't see them in our bubbles, but we know they're a big deal, so they must be out there in huge numbers. And remember, when you combine this with what the poll said, how we underestimate people who are just like us. So most Americans right now are living in a country where they believe people just like them are decreasing as a percentage of this country, and people who are not like them, man, they're increasing. This makes us, you could say this is a paranoia, because none of this is based on truth, but it surely is a fear. We develop a fear. We worry about being displaced, right? So many people out there who aren't like me. They're black, they're gay, they're transgender. All of this shit. They're not like me, and there are tons of them out there, and they're increasing every single day. And the people who look like me and act like me and think like me, man, our numbers are going down. I'm being replaced. I'm being displaced. And again, this every data point in this YouGov poll backs this up. Every American wildly overestimated how many people who are not like them are in this country. And every American wildly underestimated how many people just like them are in this country. This creates a real fear, a paranoia that my country, people like me, we're going to be gone one day, and we got all these others out there. Like I'm a good middle-aged white guy. And I'm married. I got a couple kids. I got a good, decent job. I live in a good suburb of Cleveland, man. I don't know a transgender, and I hardly ever see a Muslim. I don't know anybody who lives in New York City. But man, this country's changing. because they're all over the place, Joe. Something like 25% of the country is transgender. I'm seeing these commercials, and I listened to Hannity last night, and transgender Americans are playing in sports, women's sports all over the place. Joe, this is the shit I'm hearing. But I don't know any transgender Americans. I'm a good, decent, white, middle-aged guy living in a suburb of Cleveland. It's created this fear in this country. Fear of people who are not like us. Fear of people who might replace us. And that fear, based 100% on misinformation, on lies, impacts our politics. We then fight. We fight them. We then draw a line. They're my enemy. We then become divisive. We then become combative. We become oppositional in our politics. Our fear, transgenders are everywhere, then guides our politics. Well, fuck it. I got to go after this because, they must be everywhere because I don't know any transgenders in my community. That means out there, oh my God, they're everywhere. So, man, I got to go after them. This drives our politics. The fear drives our politics. And I think it's fairly obvious that this is what's happened. Fear of people who are not like us. Fear of people who are not like us causes us to think, as is evidenced in this poll, that 22% of the population's transgender. That's a huge number. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Americans are transgender. Fear of transgender Americans drives the American people to say that, to put that number there. When the reality is it's less than 1%. But because then we believe it, we have to fight against it. And our politics then becomes divisive and hateful. And oh my word, and we cling to people who are like us. Man, we cling. We cling. We all left, right. We all live in bubbles. We cling to people who look like us. We cling to people with the same values, which is why, right, in this poll, we all underestimate how many people are like us. We underestimate that. When in reality, there are more people like us than you know. But it's this combo meal, man, right? Where we're, oh my God, the others come and we're being replaced. And this is how we've been lashing out in our politics. And all of it's based on bullshit. It's not based on reality. And our politicians feed off of this. Feed off of it. Our politicians make it worse. Our politicians know we feel this way. I guarantee you, Donald Trump knew that. Look, if 21% of the average American thinks that, or if the average American thinks that 21% of the country is transgender, if the average American thinks that, I'll bet you the average Trump supporter it may think like 40 to 50% of the country is transgender. Donald Trump knew what that number was. Trump's team knew what that number was. So what did Trump's team do? He took that fear you have of transgenders taking over America and he threw it in your face every day. He took that fear you have of these migrants. The vast majority of Americans have never bumped into or run into a migrant in this country. Never. But yet the vast majority of Americans believe that migrants are all over this country right now, committing crimes all over this country right now. In fact, in Springfield, Ohio, they were eating people's pets. The average American believes that, when in reality, the average American has never met with, sat down with, or spoken to a Haitian migrant. So it's a vicious cycle here. We've got this fear. Politicians keep increasing the fear. The fear makes us more hateful, more divisive. The fear makes us look at people who are not like us as no longer just different, but our enemy, because they could be replacing us. My God, they're replacing good white Christian folk like me. So they've become our enemy. Politicians on both sides feed this. We live in a time right now when Trump and politicians on the right are feeding this fear we have, fear of the other, fear of the unknown, more than the left. Remember, here's the problem. Regular average Americans, reflected in these numbers. Oh my God, Joe, transgenders, huge problem. Oh my God, Joe, Muslims, a third of the country. Oh my God, Joe, blacks are almost half the country. Oh my God, Joe, gays and lesbians. Oh my God, Joe, people who live in DC and New York City. Oh my God, Joe. These regular Americans, basing all of this, proven by this poll, on utter bullshit. And Trump and the right have very effectively exacerbated this bullshit and fed this bullshit to Americans to make their fear even greater, and then their anger even greater, and then their desire to destroy their enemy even better. The left, Democrats, they're not even engaging in this. They haven't even been in the ball game when it comes to regular Americans. I mean, just again, we talked about it before. The Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs, a bullshit lie. But the Democrats don't even talk about the migrant issue. So back to, let's close with our question that we opened with. What do we do about this? This is dangerous because it's not true. Like lies and bullshit are driving us apart. Lies and bullshit are turning neighbors into enemies. Lies and bullshit, lies, not the truth, is kind of breaking us up as Americans, white, black, brown, gay, straight, transgender. What do we do about it? How does democracy deal with this? How does democracy really survive? As I asked at the beginning, remember, all of this is based on misinformation. But how does a democracy survive if its people are increasingly uninformed? And if being uninformed drives a people to be really, really fearful. That's where we are right now. How does a democracy survive? I get the short, easy answer: it doesn't and it won't. If this path continues, and cycle after cycle, if this gets worse, and I'll bet you dollars to donuts that if YouGov asks that question again this year, if in 2022 most Americans believe that 21% of the population was transgender, again, reminder, it's less than 1%. I guarantee you that number would be higher today. I bet most Americans today would say 30% of the country's transgender, because this entire campaign season, that's what Trump's been saying. They're everywhere. So the problem's getting worse. So short answer is no. A democracy, a government of the people, can't and will not survive, as Jefferson said, if we don't stay informed. And a democracy, kind of like a pact between all of us, even if and when we disagree, we're all in this together, cannot survive if we are afraid of each other and we hate each other and we believe the other person is our enemy. Democracy can't survive. So that's the easy answer. It can't and won't. So we got to fix this. How do we fix this? I'll close with, before we all head off for Thanksgiving, I'll close with the obvious answer that won't satisfy anybody listening to me right now. It's up to you. It's up to us. For better or for worse now, this country is us. Our government is us. Our media is us. Our colleges and universities are us. All of our institutions are us. This is a noble experiment in self-rule. Don't look at McConnell. Don't look at Schumer. Don't look at Trump. Don't look at Kamala Harris. They are us. This is an amazing experiment in self-government, in self-rule. It's up to us to do something about this problem. Uninformed people, more and more of us, becoming really afraid of people who are not like us. It's only up to us to stop this. And the only way to begin to stop it is to stay informed. The only way to change this is to pay attention to the truth, to not believe lies. In essence, to be informed. I mean, to be informed means you're aware of reality. 27% of America is Muslim. That ain't fucking reality. Somebody who believes that is not informed. 41% of America is Black. Someone who believes that is uninformed. So step one, Thanksgiving Eve, is we got to begin to get informed. And that means we have to begin to seek out and pay attention to the truth. Because if most of us were still sort of adhered to the truth, and if most of us understood the reality is less than 1% of the population is transgender, and we hear all these cases about transgender women playing in sports all over the country, Joe. It's an epidemic, Joe, when in reality there are like 5 or 6 cases of it all over the country. The truth, if most of us knew the truth, we would be less inclined to be fearful. If most of us knew the truth about the transgender population in America, we would be less inclined to be afraid of them. If they were 80% of the country, I get it. You're going to be afraid if they're less than 1%. If you know the truth, you're going to be less afraid of them. You'll be more open, I think, to understanding, trying to find understanding with them. And you will certainly be less inclined to look at them, hate them, and look at them as your enemy. I mean, why be afraid of any transgender American to begin with? Baby steps, Bob. We'll get to that in a little bit. Step one is we got to adhere ourselves to the truth again. Our politicians, the media, Joe Rogan and all your podcasts and all the website, they're all feeding you bullshit. They're all aware of this. They're going to keep feeding you bullshit and lies as long as you buy it. So somehow, guys, all of us, develop a relationship again with the truth. If you want to fight me and debate me on transgender Americans down the road, fine. Let's have that, but let's all be grounded in the same facts. If you want to come on my podcast and have a conversation with transgender Americans with me, an issue I have really felt very strongly about the last couple of years, I'm open to that. But we're going to have that conversation. We're going to be grounded in the truth. You're not going to have your reality, and I'm not going to have mine. We're going to have the reality. We got to get there. But we can't get there unless, and this is almost all of us, unless almost all of us seek the truth and give a fucking middle finger to politicians and the media who would lie to us. So wherever you live, whatever you believe, wherever you get your news right now, whatever is telling you right now that 30% of America is transgender, my suggestion is go somewhere else too. Go to the exact opposite. If you heard on Fox News that 30% of America is transgender, then go to some left-wing source. Go to some objective news source just to get the straight number. Like if Sean Hannity tells you that 30% of America is transgender, do me a favor, guys. Here's step one. Don't automatically believe it. Stop listening for a moment, do some research, and find out what percentage of America is transgender. This is what we have to start doing. It is on us. Because politicians ain't going to stop doing what they're doing. And the media is not going to stop doing what they're doing. They're going to keep feeding us lies and bullshit. It's on us to take the first step. Find out the truth. When you are told something about Muslims in America, first find out the truth. And on and on and on down the line. Hey, thanks for listening. I mean it. Have a wonderful, glorious Thanksgiving. You want to shoot me an email, do joewalshwhiteflag@gmail.com. All one word, joewalshwhiteflag@gmail.com. Enjoy that turkey. Be brave.
Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.